Welcome back to the Cumbie Show, where we tell it like it is and we don't care how you feel. And I got to tell it like it is in this one. Not too impressed, not too happy with what I saw in the Georgia game. Obviously, Georgia went on the road, played Georgia Tech. They did get the win, 31-23, 8-point victory. But in my opinion, I don't feel like there was a lot of things to take away from this game and really be happy about, really be excited about going into the showdown with Alabama this weekend in the SEC Championship. There were a couple of things I liked, but there's a lot of things I didn't like. A couple of the things that I did like was that I felt like Kendall Milton had another really good day. He had some really good numbers on the field. Saturday night run game looked great. And even with all the starters, another thing that I like, even with all the starters that Georgia had out, Brock Bowers was out, Ladd McConkey was out, Ra Thomas was out, Tate Rowledge was out. You had a couple guys out on defense. Damon Newman-Johnson was out. I mean, starters left and right out across the board. Even with all those guys out, Georgia still found a way to win. They still won. They put up 31 points on offense. So that is another thing that I do like that I saw. That's the reason why I hate making excuses for a loss just because a player is injured. That's where your depth and your coaching ability, coaches and development, that's where that comes into play. And Georgia has that. And if you don't have that, then you don't have it. And I do like that I saw that out of this Georgia team. But other than those two things, it wasn't the best. I wasn't expecting this. In my preview and prediction, I took Georgia to win, and I think I took Georgia to cover, or at least I took them to get really close. I believe I have the line here. The line was, for this game, it was a 24. Georgia was a 24-point favorite. They didn't even come close. They won by 8. And you got to give credit where credit is due. Georgia Tech stuck in there. Haynes King played really well. This whole Georgia Tech game, or the whole Georgia Tech team played really well for the most part, and just wasn't that good of a game. Like I said, I'm always glad Georgia gets the win, but not something that I was extremely impressed with coming out. I had to take a quick sip. But let's just kind of dive into the numbers here. One thing that changed this game, Georgia didn't give up a touchdown on their first defensive drive. But Georgia came out on offense the very next drive and turned the ball over on their first play, gave it back to Georgia Tech, who then went down the field and scored a touchdown. It's almost like we came out on defense and stopped Georgia Tech and was like, wait a second, we're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to score a touchdown. We got to give the ball right back to them. So that was a little frustrating to watch, because I was so happy that, yes, we finally stopped the team on their first offensive drive. Now let's get the ball back, go down, get up early on Georgia Tech, cruise to victory. First play of the game, we fumbled the damn ball. That was very frustrating to watch. And then, like I said, Georgia Tech went right down the field and scored a touchdown. I was like, you got to be kidding. It's become a joke at this point for Georgia. What are we doing? But nonetheless, let's kind of dive into the numbers here and get in depth in this game. Georgia had 437 total offensive yards. Georgia Tech had 363. Rushing yards, Georgia rushed for 262 with a 6.7 average. Georgia Tech rushed for 205 yards, 4.7 average. 205 total rushing yards for Georgia Tech. That's what I don't like. Passing yards, only 175 on the day. 8.8 average for Carson Beck. And then Georgia Tech, Haynes King had 150, 7.5 average on the day. Penalties, I think this is something I want to talk about, and I think I'm going to make a separate video to discuss this. But was this one of the worst officiating games that we've ever seen? There was an ACC crew out there officiating this game, and it was not just this game. Multiple games last weekend had horrendous officiating, and they were all by ACC crews. The ACC officiating crews have got to be some of the worst in the nation. That was a bad game. Now, nonetheless, Georgia still won, so I'm not using the refs as an excuse at why Georgia still won. But even with that being said, this was god-awful to watch. This was painful to watch. The blatant missed calls, the head-scratching calls, the what the hell are we doing? What are you seeing? What are you looking at? Like left and right. And I'm going to use an example that wasn't this game, but it was the Georgia-Auburn game where there was a clear face mask on the kick return, and they called a penalty on on Auburn for a block in the back when there was no block in the back, even though the Auburn return man basically had his neck broken from a face mask by Alabama. What the heck? But that's just one example. But these were some of the worst. Georgia had 6 penalties on the day for 60 yards. That is by far their worst game when it comes to this. Was a undisciplined team, and I don't even know if I would really put it on Georgia. There was a lot of penalties that that were called on both teams, not just Georgia, on Georgia Tech as well. Even though Georgia Tech only had 3 calls on them, I was just scratching my head. I'm like, what the hell is going on? This is by far, to this whole season, the worst refereeing job that I have seen all season long in any game. I couldn't believe it. And this was frustrating to watch. But nonetheless, even with the horrible officiating, Georgia still won. So not using that excuse. Third down conversion, Georgia's still looking really good. 50% for them. They were 4 of 8. Georgia Tech, this is where I think kind of really limited them. They were 2 of 11 on third down conversion. They were sitting at 18% when it comes down to third down conversion on the night. That's piss poor. Another good stop by Georgia defense. And Georgia Tech, as a team like Georgia Tech, you can't have those numbers and expect to beat a team like Georgia. You've got to be able to convert on third downs, but they just couldn't. Carson Beck was 13 of 20, 65 completion percentage, 175 yards. He had 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and like I said, he averaged 8.8 a throw. That 1 interception, so Georgia had 2 turnovers in the game. That fumble on their very first play, and then the interception by Carson Beck. Now, the interception itself, I don't put on Carson Beck. It was tipped in the end zone, caught by Georgia Tech. There's no way to predict where a ball is going to go when it gets tipped. But I will say that throw by Carson Beck was a very poor throw. He should not have thrown that ball. So while I don't put the interception solely on him, I put the fact that he made a very poor throw into tight coverage where a ball got tipped, and Georgia Tech was able to come up with a tipped ball. And that was a time where Georgia could have started to pull away from Georgia Tech. But nonetheless, 2 turnovers on the game. Haynes King went 11 of 20, 55 completion percentage, 158 yards. He had 0 touchdowns passing, but he had 2 rushing touchdowns. He also had 0 interceptions, and he averaged 7.5 a throw. He had 24 rushing yards in the game, Haynes King did. Like I said, their 2 rushing touchdowns come from Haynes King. And this is the issue that I see for Georgia in this game, is that Haynes King was able to do just enough with his legs in the red zone to be able to put points up on the board. Both of his rushing touchdowns come in the red zone where he rushed the ball to get a touchdown. And that was very frustrating to watch. I felt like our secondary did a decent enough job, but I didn't feel like we set the edge really well in this game. There was a couple of times where I felt like Georgia Tech was able to get around us on the run, on the edge, and you shouldn't. Plain and simple, you shouldn't. Georgia Tech had 205 rushing yards on the day. Georgia should not allow that against a team like Georgia Tech. But like I said, you got to give credit where credit is due. Georgia Tech was able to come into this game, run the ball effectively, use Haynes King effectively, and they took advantage of Georgia's weakness in a lot of the ways. They kept this game very close, which is what I said in my preview and prediction. The only way for Georgia Tech to win this game, in my opinion, because I don't think they're going to be able to get explosive plays after explosive plays, is that they're going to have to keep this a tight game. They cannot let Georgia pull away from them. I said, late in the fourth, you need to look at this game and say, oh, wow, Georgia's only up 1 score. Oh, wow, this game is tied. That's what I said in my preview and prediction, and that is exactly what happened. I called it again. I did expect Georgia to pull away in this game and it be a relative easy win. But I said the keys for Georgia Tech is to keep this a hard-hitting, close, tight game. And late in the fourth, be within 1 score or tied up with the opportunity to win. And that is exactly what Georgia Tech did. They kept it. They stayed in this game. They fought hard. They made it a 4-quarter game for Georgia, which is what a lot of teams haven't been able to do this year. A couple have, but most of them haven't been able to do on this Georgia defense. Georgia Tech did exactly that. They took advantage of Georgia's weaknesses on defense. They got around. They set the edge. They used Haynes King just enough, and they were able to effectively run the ball. And that was one of the most frustrating things to watch, is how effective Georgia Tech was able to move the ball on the ground. And obviously with a lot of Georgia's starters being out, that it really did feel like our offense was playing in mud. And that was frustrating within itself. I mean, at the end, in the fourth quarter, there was a chance, like Georgia won by 8. Georgia Tech had the ball late in the fourth, down by 8, able to go down and tie. Like, if they score a touchdown and they convert their 2-point conversion, this game's tied 31-31, and we could possibly see an overtime game against Georgia Tech. And in overtime, anything's on the table. But nonetheless, Georgia gets the win. They go on the road to Atlanta, get the win over Georgia Tech. They improve to 12-0 on the undefeated regular season. Third time. This is the first time in history where a team has gone 12-0 3 straight years. Georgia improves to 29 straight wins. First time an SEC team has done that, consecutive wins. Georgia's making history here. Kirby Smart and these boys are making history. Even though it hasn't been the prettiest along the way this season, this is a dominant showing by this Georgia team and by this coaching staff. We are seeing Kirby and these dogs do something that we've never seen before. And it's a good day to be a dog. Plain and simple. It is a good day to be a dog fan. And glad that Georgia goes undefeated in the regular season. Their next opponent is going to be Alabama in the SEC championship game. I will have a preview and prediction of that video coming out later today. Going fully in depth. Probably going to be a little bit longer video. I am pumped. I cannot wait. But none of that, Georgia beats Georgia Tech 31-23. Fuck you, Georgia Tech. Over and out.